1. Layers, folders, and the Layers panel. The Layer panel is located on the right side of the screen and can be turned on or off by pressing F7. In it, you will find layers and folders. When you first create a new document, you will see only one layer named Background. This is the white on the canvas, and it's always locked. To make it editable, just double-click it and hit OK. Now you can use this layer, for example, to draw something. I'll select the brush tool and just fool around. At the bottom of the panel, you have a couple of buttons, one of them being Create New Layer. Press that and you'll have a new layer. If I draw on it, but then decide I don't like it, I can always delete it by hitting the Delete key, or just dragging it to the dumpster. That's the role of layers. You can think of them like transparent pieces of paper that stack on top of each other. You draw a house on one layer, and a car on another, maybe a tree on the next, and so forth. The end result looks like only one image, but it's actually the stacking that makes it look that way. If I don't like what I'm doing with the house, I can erase and adjust, but notice that the objects from the other layers aren't affected. This is the whole concept of layers, non-destructive editing. This allows you to achieve a lot of things this way. The eye to the left of the layer indicates its visibility. If you press it, you make it invisible. Press it again to make it visible. Scroll up and down for a mass action, or hold Alt while clicking on an eye to make only that layer visible. The most important part is you notice on which layer you're clicking on. The active layer is always highlighted, so be sure to check that. Also, layers stack on top of each other. So let's say I have this nice picture. If I want to play around with it, but not ruin the original image, I create a new layer and work on that. Folders act the same way as in your operating system. They organize things. Press this button at the bottom to create a folder, then drag the layers inside it. Better yet, select a couple of layers by using Ctrl and then hit Ctrl-G to group them. Be sure to always group files that belong together. Furthermore, you can rename any layer or folder by double-clicking on its name, so you can easily find them. You have other buttons at the bottom of the Layers panel, but at this point, you're interested in the Layer Styles panel. We'll use this quite a lot, so press U, drag a rectangle, and then add Layer Styles to it. Notice how every option works. With this, we can create a lot of web elements like menus, buttons, backgrounds, and more. Let's just leave a stroke on our square for the moment and focus on the top of the panel. Here you have opacity and fill. Lower the opacity and the entire square fades in visibility. Lower the fill and the layer effect, in this case the stroke, remains the same. That's the difference between opacity and fill. In CS6, you have these options at the top through which you can search for a layer. You can look for it by name, by color, by effect, and it's nice to have it. You can turn it off by hitting this button, though you should leave it as is. Last thing that interests you about this panel is the possibility to lock a layer. Say you don't want to move a layer by accident. To do that, just use this lock icon and you're all set. This concludes the Layers panel for the moment. 2. Move Tool and Moving Layers. You can move layers and folders in the Layers panel by dragging. In order to move a layer on the canvas, hit the V key. Press that, and now if you have a layer selected, you can move it around if it's not locked. You can move it with your mouse or with your keyboard arrow keys. You can also use Shift and an arrow key to move it by 10 pixels. To select a layer from the canvas, and not from the Layers panel, just hold Ctrl and left-click it on the screen. Check the right side, and you'll see it's going to be selected there as well. Use Ctrl-Shift and click to select multiple ones. Always take a look at the Layers panel to see what you're selecting. Here's a neat trick. Say you're on the Brush tool, but you want to move a layer around. Instead of pressing V, you can hold Ctrl and you'll temporarily have the Move tool selected instead of your current one. This way, you don't have to constantly switch tools. We need to move objects with precision, so, to help us, Photoshop has a bunch of options. The first one is the Guides. From the side, click and drag and you'll see a light blue line appear. That's a guide. This can help you align things. You can drag guides from the top too. To show or hide them, toggle Control, semicolon. Notice that if you're on the Move tool and go over a guide, you can actually move it. That's great, but sometimes you want to lock them. To do that, press Control, Alt, semicolon. The grid is another option Photoshop has for you. Press Control apostrophe and it will show up. Lining things up has never been easier. Want more? You got it. How about Smart Guides? Place multiple objects on the canvas and move one. You'll see some red lines appear indicating how your object is placed in relation to others. If they don't show up, go to View, Show, Smart Guides. Last but not least, we have this top panel. Select multiple objects and play with these options to see how they work. Their names may sound complicated, but the icons really tell the story. These are amazing when you want to perfectly align or distribute items on the canvas. And while we're at the top, let's take a look at the left side. I told you about the Control-Click technique, used to select a layer or a group from the canvas, but you can also check this Auto Select box and get almost the same thing. With that option activated, wherever you click on the canvas, that layer or folder will be selected. Uncheck that since it's not good for the workflow. The Show Transform Controls is another box you need to leave unchecked, because we use the Control-T method to resize an object if we want that. So we've learned a lot of things about layers, folders, and moving things around with precision. 3. Selection Tools. These are the tools through which you can select an area of an image and further work on it. You have multiple tools that can perform selections, each one of them working in a slightly different way, in order to accommodate for different circumstances. Something to notice is that you can't free transform, delete, paint over, or work on your selection if your layer is a smart object. I'll explain that concept a bit later on, but at this point, you need to know that this applies for every selection tool. The Marquee tool is the first one in our side panel. Hit M to select it, and use it to make rectangular or elliptical selections on your canvas. Get the regular one and drag across the screen. This is your selection. To deselect, hit Ctrl-D or right-click and hit Deselect. If you want a perfect square selection, hold Shift while dragging. Hold Space if you want to move it around. To add to a selection, just hold the Shift key and drag. To subtract, hold the Alt key while dragging. You'll see a plus or a minus symbol on your cursor, depending if you're adding or subtracting. To make a selection from the middle, hold down Alt-Shift while dragging. Same principles apply for the elliptical marquee tool. After you've made a selection, you can right-click and have multiple options. These are common for all selections, no matter what tool you've used. The first option is very straightforward, and it's Deselect. You might think it's a pretty useless tool, but keep in mind that sometimes you may forget to deselect, and you won't be able to use other tools until you've finished with your selection. For example, if I forgot about this selection and I wanted to move the entire layer, look what happens. Only that area will move. So always make sure you deselect. Of course, using Ctrl-D is faster, and we'll always use that. Inverse is the second option, and it's quite useful when you want to select an object from your image, but it's easier to select everything around it and then reverse the selection. Feather blurs the transition between the selection and the surrounding pixels. When you click it, a box will appear asking you what pixel radius you want selected. Use something dramatic like 50 pixels and then press Ctrl-J. This is the best way to understand it. Sometimes you may work for a very long time and make a detailed selection, and you might not want to lose it. To keep it, press Save Selection from the menu. Choose a name, and then you can forget about it. Then, when you want it back, just go to Select, Load Selection. Choose its name, and you'll have it right back. Layer via Copy and Layer via Cut are widely used. The first one duplicates the region you selected and puts it on a new layer. Use Ctrl-J for the same effect. If you want to remove that area you selected from the current layer and put it on a new one, go to Layer via Cut. Free Transform is another useful option used to change the dimensions of the selected area. Control-T does the same thing. Don't confuse it with Transform Selection. Press it and you'll have these handles appear, and you can use them to adjust the area you selected. As you can see, it doesn't affect the actual pixels, so that's the difference between it and Free Transform. Our last important options are Fill and Stroke. Use them to get exactly what they say. Fill your selection with a color, gradient, pattern, or content aware. Or add a stroke to it. Lasso, Polygonal Lasso, and Magnetic Polygonal Lasso tool. The hotkey is L, and you can use Shift-L to scroll through them. For the lasso, just draw a shape on the current layer you're on, and that will be selected. As you can see, this isn't really built for precision, but in combination with other tools, it can work very well. You can use Shift or Alt to add or subtract to a selection, like always. You have two main options at the top: the feathering, which makes the edges of your selection fade away, and the Refine Edge, which opens up a panel with multiple options, so your selection is spot on. I won't describe all these options since intricate, complex selections aren't widely used in web design. You should play around with each of these options so you can see their effects, but keep in mind we won't do crazy detailed selections like fuzzy hair and things like that. So let's move on. The polygonal lasso works the same way. The main difference is the way you select an area, and that is by clicking and setting points. This works great for straight objects like buildings, and you can really crank up the speed with it. Now, the magnetic polygonal lasso has a bunch more options up top to play with, and the idea behind it is that it sticks to an image you want selected. So, it basically tries to figure out what the area you want selected based on the contrast and other elements. It's not often you'll use it, but it's good to know about it. The Magic Wand and the Quick Selection tool. The Magic Wand can be accessed by using the W key. It intelligently selects a group of pixels with the same approximate color. In order to use it, just click on the area of pixels you want selected. Use Shift and Alt, as always, to adjust your area of your selection. In order to get a better result, play with the tolerance. A higher tolerance will mean it will select pixels more roughly, while a lower tolerance will make it more precise. The Refine Edge option is also available, as it is for every tool you can make selections with, so be sure to use it. The Quick Selection tool performs the same way. The difference is that you hold your mouse button while you drag. Use the square brackets on your keyboard to adjust the brush size, and have the Auto Enhance option checked. Using Alt is a must, since most of the time it will select more than you want. One last great trick I want to show you is the Select by Color range. Go to the Select menu, get Color Range, and you'll see a menu pop up. Click on a color you want to select from the canvas. Use the preview in the options to sort through your selection and press OK. What you just did is save a lot of manual work by using this option. You may need to go back and forth a few times in order to get the best settings, but it's an amazing option you should use. That wraps up selections. 4. Crop, Eyedropper, and Ruler tool. The Crop tool allows you to select an area of an image and discard everything outside this area. It's a very simple tool, and its hotkey is C. Don't worry about the precision, since you have handles that will allow you to adjust your area. Press Enter, and the rest will disappear. You can also use it to resize your canvas. Just drag to the side you want enlarged and press Enter. And just in case you somehow have a tilted picture, you can straighten it with this option up top. Look for the angle you're aiming for, and that's about it. For the Eyedropper tool, press I on your keyboard. With this tool, you can select a color from an image. It's very useful when you want to find out an exact color code. I'll press the Print Screen key on my keyboard, then Ctrl-V to paste, and now I can use the eyedropper to find out the color of this background. Notice that when you click on your image, your foreground color from the left side will change. Double-click that and you will see its color code at the bottom. In CS6, you will see your dimensions of your selection while on the Marquee tool. This is indeed very useful when you want to take measurements fast. If you have CS5, you'll have to use the Ruler tool. It's underneath the eyedropper, and with it, you drag lines and the measurements appear up top. Hold Shift while dragging to get a straight line, and once you're done, press the Clear button up top. 5. Brush and Color Replacement Tool. You can use these tools to create something unique in your projects. You can hit the B key and you'll have the brush tool selected. Use Shift B to scroll through the others. These tools are a large part of Photoshop and the possibilities are endless. You can spend years using brushes and still have much to learn. Lucky for us, web design doesn't require a massive amount of knowledge of these tools. This is why you should just browse around and play with different options so you can have an idea of how these work. What you should know at this point is that you can get a lot of free brushes on the internet. To use them, just double-click and they will automatically load into Photoshop. Click this little icon in the top right corner, and you will find multiple options regarding the way Photoshop displays your brushes, options to reset, save, delete, or replace your current brush set. But again, this is not the object of the course, so let's move on. The Color Replacement tool is great for changing the color of an object. The best way to learn is to see it in action. Grab a picture, choose a foreground color, and start brushing on the image. Depending on the colors, you may not get a perfect result each time. Make sure to have the Anti-Alias option checked and play with the tolerance. Some areas might need a bit more precision, so zoom in and lower the brush size. This is a great tool, and be sure to use it in your projects. 6. Eraser tool. The Eraser tool lets you delete pixels as you drag across an image. When you select the Eraser tool, you have various options available in the toolbar. Brush. Options include the size of the eraser, hardness of edges, and various styles. Mode. There are 3 options: brush, soft edges; pencil, hard edges; and block, square, brush size. 100% opacity erases pixels completely. 0 does not erase at all. 50 is semi-transparent. This is great when you want to gently erase a part of an image to get a certain effect. Flow determines how quickly the erasure is applied by the brush. Lower settings produce a more subtle effect. And that's the eraser, a very simple yet powerful tool. 7. Gradient and Paint Bucket tool. The Gradient tool creates a gradual blend between multiple colors. You can choose from preset gradient fills or create your own by adjusting the foreground and background colors. You can also get a lot of great ones for free from the internet. The hotkey is G. Before you use a gradient, first make sure you have the right settings at the top. Click this box, and a new panel will appear with all your current gradients. You probably only have a few, but you can easily load some by pressing the Load button. By using this area at the bottom, you can manipulate your gradient in many ways until you achieve your desired result. These 5 icons at the top set the direction of the gradient. The best way to learn is by using them. Linear gradient. Make shades from the starting point to the ending point in a straight line. Radial gradient. Shades from the starting point to the ending point in a circular pattern. Angle gradient. Shades in a counterclockwise sweep around the starting point. Reflected gradient. Mirrors the same linear gradient on either side of the starting point. Diamond gradient. Shades from the middle to the outer corners of a diamond pattern. The mode is something we'll discuss later, and the opacity adjusts the gradient's visibility. To reverse the order of the colors in the gradient fill, select Reverse. To create a smoother blend with less banding, select Dither. I know these options make it seem like a complex tool, but gradients are easy and fun, and you'll get them in no time. The Paint Bucket tool is great when you want to fill an area with color. For example, we'll make a selection on this area, hit G, choose our color, and then click. We've just filled that selection with the Paint Bucket tool. Use the tolerance to adjust how the tool will target the area. 8. Dodge, Burn, Sponge, and Pen Tool. We won't be using these tools a lot, but they might come in handy in some rare project. Dodge Tool. Use it to lighten an area. Always good to check Protect Tones. Burn. It's the opposite of Dodge, makes things darker. Sponge. With this tool you can either saturate or desaturate. Change the way it works by using the Mode option up top. If you check Vibrance, the tool will act more gently. This is nice when you want certain areas to pop more. Let's see Saturate in action. And Desaturate has this effect. This is mainly used for photo manipulation, but you may use it in a project or two. The Pen tool is another major component of Photoshop, next to the brushes and selections. It has an infinite potential, and that can be very scary for inexperienced users. It can be used to create more complex shapes, to make very detailed selections, and much more. Having said that, our web design projects don't necessarily need those skills, so looking into them at this point won't do you any favors. I recommend you hit P to select it, then play around to see what it can do. Set a point, then click and drag to make what is called a Bezier curve, and now look to close the shape. You'll notice your cursor will change when you're about to close it off. If you right-click, you'll get the same menu as for any selection. 9. Type Tool. Press T, and you'll have the horizontal type tool. You can create text layers in two ways. First, just click and start typing. The second option, click and drag to constrain the text to a certain area. You can also adjust the area by using these controllers on each side. In both ways, if you want to go to the next line, hit Enter. If you want to finish, use the numerical enter from the right side of your keyboard, or press the check mark at the top. If you want to discard your text, press Escape. To customize your text appearance, use the Character panel on the right side. Here you have multiple options. The first one is the font face. Click the drop-down to change it. To add more fonts, use sites like google.com/webfonts or www.dafont.com. Download these fonts and copy-paste them into your operating system. For Windows, that's C Windows Fonts. To the right of that, you have the font style. That can be narrow, regular, italic, bold, and many others depending on your font. The size is pretty straightforward. Adjust it to make the text bigger or smaller. Leading is what is called line height in CSS and refers to the height between two lines of text. Another option is the letter spacing. Some fonts look good, but if you put more space between the letters, it will look great. Use this option to make great headlines. Anti-aliasing is also very important for the aspect of the text. Anti-aliasing is the smoothing of jagged edges in text by averaging the colors of the pixels at a boundary. You can choose from crisp, smooth, sharp, and none, depending on the font, its size, and color. Some options will look better than others. As you use type more and more, you will get accustomed to it and learn about the many possibilities it has to offer and bring your typography to a new level. 10. Direct Selection Tool. For us, the Direct Selection tool is important in working with rounded rectangles, which basically translates into button manipulation. Say you've made a very nice button with rounded corners and you want to make it bigger. The normal Control-T approach distorts the button's aspect. If you look at the edges, you will notice a difference. What you need to do is hit A for the Direct Selection tool. Make sure you're on the white arrow in the left pane, not the black one. Now go inside the button and select the top edge, then hold Shift and select the bottom edge. Now go to the line, hold Shift, and drag to the side. Now your button is longer, but it has the same corner radius. Hit Enter to finish up. 11. Shapes. The hotkey is U, and it has multiple tools underneath. They create vector shapes so you can make them as large or as small as you want without losing quality. These have a large role in web design. For example, you can use the Rectangle tool to mock up the layout of a web page. Drag multiple objects across the screen that represent the logo, main menu, slideshow, content area, and so on. The color of the shape is dictated by your foreground color. After you've placed it on the canvas, double-click on its thumbnail in the Layers panel to change its color. You can use Ctrl-T to resize it as you want. Plus, you can modify it even further by right-clicking and selecting one of the presented options like Skew, Perspective, Distort, and so on. At the top panel, you have a couple of options through which you can gain even more freedom in creating your shapes. First, you can manually input its width and height by entering a value in pixels in these two boxes. To the right, you have a drop-down that controls the way a shape is added to a canvas. It can be placed into a new layer. It can combine with an existing shape and more. One of the main reasons I love CS6 from the previous versions is the edges around shapes. In CS5, when you made a shape, some lines were fuzzy and you had to correct them manually, and the only way to do that was with zooming in real close and using Ctrl-T. Now that's not a problem anymore with Align Edges. Always have that checked since it makes your shapes very crisp and smooth. The Rounded Rectangle tool is virtually the same as the Rectangle tool, the only difference being the radius you can select at the top of the screen. That controls the shape's roundness. Usually 4 to 5 pixels means a pretty subtle rounded corner, whilst anything over 10 means quite rounded. The Line tool will come useful in a lot of situations. Make sure it's solid, with no stroke, and always see that the weight is set at 1 pixel. If you want bigger lines, you can always use Ctrl-T, or just use the Rectangle tool. Custom shapes are great since they are vector shapes as well, so you can make them as big as life and they will still look good. Even better, there are a lot of free custom shapes on the internet that you can download for free. Make sure you have a nice collection so you can use them in your projects. 12. Undo and the History panel. Photoshop has this amazing ability through which you can go back in time by using the History panel. You can activate it by going to Window, History, or by clicking on the first icon in the right side menu. Remember that Ctrl-Z is undo, but if you press it again, that will be redo. So in case you want to go back multiple steps, you'll need to use Ctrl-Alt-Z. I recommend you work with 10 history states if you have an older computer. This may not seem like a lot, but the more states you have, the more juice Photoshop will need. 13. Vectors versus pixels and smart objects. The concept of a pixel shape versus a vector shape is simple. One can't be enlarged without losing quality, while the other can. For example, if you draw a rectangle and enlarge it, everything will scale and you won't lose any quality. Everything is pixel perfect and crisp. On the other hand, if you have a normal set of pixels like these and try to enlarge the image, you will get a bad result. Just look how everything seems distorted and pixelated. Normal pixel layers have this icon on in the Layers panel, while shape objects have this small thumbnail to the left of them. Another icon you will notice in the Layers panel is this one. See the small little icon in the thumbnail? That means this image is a smart object. These layers act in a great way. They protect your original image so, for example, if you want to add a filter to it, you can turn it off and the image remains the same. If you try that with a normal layer, you can't turn it off. It's permanent. An even better and clearer example is with resizing. We have the same picture. One is a smart object, the other is not. We'll make them tiny, then resize them to their original form. You'll see one is very fuzzy, while the other is not. That is because Photoshop stores those pixels in the smart object form. To convert a layer to a smart object, go to the Layer panel, right-click on it, and hit Convert to Smart Object. If you want to transform it to a normal layer, hit Rasterize. Why would you want to do that? Well, if you have only smart objects, your project will demand more resources. For example, take a look at the size of the same project, one saved with most layers as smart objects, and another version saved with normal layers. The difference in size is considerable. 14. Blending modes. As you now know, layers stack on top of each other. You can achieve multiple effects by changing the way they interact with blending modes. I suggest you get 2 layers, place them on the canvas in the approximate same position, and scroll through the blending modes. Depending on the colors in the layer, your results will vary. Play with the opacity and you'll get even more out of this powerful tool. Note that if you have a certain layer effect activated, blending modes won't work. This is how we achieve nice textures and amazing effects. There are a lot of options and possibilities, but you'll see me only use a few in the real world of web design. 15. Layer styles. We will use these all the time. You can access them by clicking on the small icon here. Note that in CS5, the order of these tools is different. Mastering layer effects is crucial in web design because it allows you to obtain great web elements like menu bars, call to action boxes, buttons, and basically every single element a website needs. To learn them in their settings, you have to see how they interact, and the only way to do that is by practicing and using them in real life. At this point, I suggest you set a background color, drag a shape, and start adding layer styles to see how they work. After you're done, hit OK, and you'll see you've chosen effects underneath the layers. You can toggle the visibility of each effect or the entire lot. You can also right-click and copy these layer styles so you can apply them to other objects. You can also clear the layer styles by using this option here.